Hello, everyone. We are here for tonight's webinar on 5 red flags that you are in an emotionally destructive relationship. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Get settled. Take a deep breath. You know me in technology. This always makes me so nervous. So say a prayer for me that we get all the buttons right and I don't press the wrong button. They changed their technology in Webinar Jam. So we're going to try our first webinar with this new technology, and hang in here because the transitions from me being here to the slides and back may take a bit of time. So just be with me, hang in there. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Tell me where you're all from. I'm going to kind of just see. I just love to get to know you a little bit, and we're going to have some great teaching tonight. I'm going to switch over to the slides. You have a handout on your right-hand slide. You should see at right-hand side of your slides, you should see a little link that you can download a handout for tonight's webinar and get all the information, most of it written down for you, and then you can take notes from that. If you don't have it, don't worry, just pull out a piece of paper. You will want to take some notes because I'm going to give you some awesome information, and you are going to know without a doubt tonight 3 things. You're going to know whether you're in a destructive marriage. You're going to know what God's word says about those kind of things, and you are going to get some ideas that are going to be very different than perhaps you've heard before. So let me just see where you're all from. Canada, you're from Ohio. I love how Maria wrote that. We've got somebody from Georgia, more people from Canada, Florida, San Diego, California. I love San Diego, Arizona. Yay, Linda, I'm from Arizona. More Canadians, North Carolina, Hawaii. Got, okay, all kinds of people everywhere. Arizona, more, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Southern Illinois. Wonderful, wonderful. Chicago, Wyoming. Good, 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 good. Thank you so much for joining us. And I am Leslie Vernick, if you haven't met me, and I'll tell you a little bit more about myself as soon as I switch over to the slides. But welcome, take a deep breath. We're going to sit for a while, and my goal is to be done with my teaching in about 45 minutes, but I may just kind of go on and on a little bit if I feel like the Spirit is giving more information to share with you. And I hope you stay to the end because I have a very special gift for those of you who hang in for the whole webinar. And you will get that in your email box tomorrow. We know who stayed for the whole thing, so we'll know that. But I just really appreciate, I don't take your time lightly, and you know, if you know anything about me, that I will give you quality information. And so stay to the end because I've got some really neat stuff to share with you that God has just laid on my heart. I see so many women and some men who are in emotionally destructive marriages, and overall they get very poor counsel on how to deal with that. So I'm going to give you some things that perhaps you haven't heard before. So give me a minute. I'm going to switch into my slides. Pray that I don't press the wrong button and have to start all over. But here we go. Hold on. I'm going to press a button that says I have to share my screen. So hold on just a minute. Can I get some technical support so I don't press the wrong button? So I'm over here. I've got to press this one. You're in the wrong mode. I don't know. Okay, I think we have arrived. Oh, praise you, Lord. Thank you so much. You don't know how much that scares me. It scares me a lot. So tonight's webinar is 5 red flags that you are in an emotionally destructive marriage. And perhaps you signed up for this webinar because you already know something is very wrong in your marriage because you feel it every day. Every day you feel sick. Every night you're tired of living confused, being told you're crazy, and feeling afraid of what's going wrong. Maybe you're tired of being ignored or humiliated and bullied or bashed by the one who promised to love and cherish you the most. But you don't know what to do, and you don't want to do the wrong thing. You don't want to mess up your children. You don't want to disappoint God or give up hope that your spouse could change. And you might not even want to give up on yourself. And yet you're here because you're sick of yourself. You don't like the person you're becoming in the midst of this destructive relationship. You're afraid to be honest with your spouse. You avoid conflict like the plague. And you haven't been true to the woman that you know God calls you to be. And you find yourself reactive, angry, defensive, depressed, or just feeling small like a little child who hasn't grown up and doesn't know what to do next. But you're afraid to speak up for yourself or take a stand or put your foot down to some things that desperately need to change. So I just want you to know that I am so glad you took this courageous step tonight to join me. And I have 3 promises for you. First, I'm going to help you get crystal clear whether or not you're in an emotionally destructive marriage. Second, I want you to know that the Bible does talk about verbal and emotional abuse as well as the damage it does to people. And third, I'm going to give you some specific steps that you can take right now, today, tomorrow, the next day, so you can gain greater confidence, courage, and support so that you can become stronger, saner, and safer. Because it's only from that place will you be able to make the wisest choices about what to do about your marriage. Now, in case you don't know me and you showed up because someone invited you to this webinar or you saw something on Facebook, let me just take a few minutes to introduce myself. I'm Leslie Vernick. I'm a Christian counselor, relationship coach, author, and speaker. I'm a mom of 2 and a nana of 3 darling grandchildren, which I thought you would love to see. Of course, Grandma always shares Grandma pictures. I've also, let me just tell you who they are. The one on the left is Natalia. She's the youngest. The middle one is Amaya. She's the oldest. And Leilani is in my lap there. I've written 7 books, including the best-selling books, The Emotionally Destructive Relationship and The Emotionally Destructive Marriage. And I want you to know a little bit about my career because I never began counseling or my career thinking I would be an expert on abuse, but God had other ideas. In fact, it was because of my own personal experience growing up with an abusive mother and my estrangement from her most of my adult life that led me to ask the hard questions about how does our Christian faith and God's love and grace, as well as forgiveness, look on the horizontal plane when you're dealing with an angry, bitter, unrepentant, indifferent, harsh, abusive, and scary person, especially when you're your own mother or your own husband, your flesh and blood, your family. And I didn't know how to answer that question back then. But I knew what it was like to live with the effects and consequences of verbal and physical abuse, even as I tried to walk out my faith in my personal life and practice it in my profession. And I tell you this because I think God allowed my suffering to make me more aware and to open my eyes to a very real and ugly reality in many people's homes, even to those who go to church and profess to know God. Way back in the 70s, right after graduate school, yes, a very long time ago, I found myself at my very first job after my master's degree in social work. I worked at a local hospital, and guess what I did? I was assigned the very first job of teaching doctors and nurses in the emergency room how to be aware of child abuse. And before it was popular to screen childcare workers in churches in the 80s, I was pleading with pastors and church leaders to make sure that those who were most vulnerable, our children, were never, ever left in the care of someone who might harm them. Now, after I wrote my second book, How to Act Right When Your Spouse Acts Wrong, I started to write another book that never got written, but it was a book about good marriages because I was looking for a more positive spin on my ministry and writing, but God told me no. He said, Leslie, I have lots of good authors and preachers who speak about good and healthy marriages, but there is no one talking about the bad ones. And so I choose you to be my ambassador. And he led me to this verse in Proverbs where it says, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed. Yes, speak up for the poor and helpless and see that they get justice. And I just thought it was amazing that this verse was right before the verses on the wife of noble character. And so since that time, God has used me to speak up all over the world for women. For example, I spoke about 12 years ago in Romania. I spoke about 8 years ago in Iraq, helping women to help other women who had been abused and mistreated. Worked with nurses there, helping them to help women who are giving birth to babies get safe and get sane if they can. And leaders in the country of Iraq. ISIS is right where I was right now. ISIS is in Erbil, and that's where I was teaching the government leaders and government counselors who worked with abused women and those traumatized by war. And most recently, just last year, I was in Cuba before it was open to the public to help counselors and church leaders be better equipped to respond to destructive marital problems with God's wisdom and his truth. So before I start with my teaching for you, can you just let me know how familiar you are with my teaching? And that will just help me to kind of gauge how much you might already know. If you're really familiar with it, just press yes, a lot, or just a little bit, or not at all. Pick one of those survey answers, and that will just kind of help me gauge a little bit more about how familiar you are. I have a lot to share with you tonight, and in full disclosure, probably I won't be able to share everything I'd like to on this important topic. In the past week or so, I've been doing some Facebook Lives on the specific things that people say to women in destructive marriages that make them feel crazy. I've talked about this crazy making stuff that church leaders tell you, your counselors tell you, that your husband tells you, and even that you tell yourself, such as, you know what, you should be willing to suffer for Jesus. Or if you're not willing to forgive and forget, you're the one with a hard heart. And these teaching sessions are recorded on my professional Facebook page. And if you haven't had a chance to watch them, I highly encourage you to avail yourself of this additional help. So as I mentioned, I'm going to cover what a healthy marriage is, as well as the 5 warning signs that you're in a destructive marriage. We're going to look at what God's word has to say about emotional abuse and the impact unrepentant sin has on marriages. And lastly, what you can do to change, because the only person that you can change is you. And if it's okay with you, I would also like to tell you how to continue your growth after this webinar, as well as get some amazing support from me, as well as other women who know what your life is like. I'm going to share with you about a wonderful, amazing support group called Conquer. I'm not going to talk too much about it right now, but I'm going to talk a little bit about it at the end if it's all right with you, because Conquer is helping women every day find her voice, develop her courage, and center herself in God. In fact, I'd just like to know, how many Conquer ladies do we have watching this webinar right now? If you're in Conquer, just kind of give a shout out on the chat. Hey, I'm a Conquer lady. I'm a Conquer lady. If you're a Conquer lady, just so that people can see that you're here and what you think of Conquer. So I want to see how many of you are familiar with my work. And I am seeing not those results yet. So if my tech person can help me understand where that might be on the chat, that would be really, really helpful. So let's get started with what's going on. How do we know we're in a destructive relationship? I see a lot of Conquer's ladies. Conquer lady, love it, powerful support. I'm in one of your core classes. Okay, Conquer lady, I would like to join Conquer. You're going to hear about that later. But I want to know how many people are familiar with my work. I don't see the answer to that survey. Is that up there yet? It's coming. Okay, it's coming. All right, so let's just get started. So how do you know you're in a destructive relationship? Because you don't know how to put it into words. You don't know how to put it into words, but you do feel it. That's why we're going to go with feelings. How do you know you're in a destructive relationship? What are the 5 red flag feelings that you know you're in a destructive marriage? One is your head hurts, your stomach aches, your knees knock, your teeth chatter, your heart pounds, your blood pressure rises, you throw up. And you may experience these red flags that you're in a destructive marriage because something is wrong. And I don't want you to minimize the destructive elements in your marriage if you only experience one of these red flags. And one of them is that you feel controlled. You feel controlled. As an adult person in your marriage, you're not allowed to be yourself, to speak your mind, to have your own feelings or thoughts or opinions. And disagree? I remember working with a couple, Bill and Teresa, came to my office, and they had a fight. And the reason they came to my office was because of this fight. Bill threw Teresa's cell phone, into a sink full of soapy water. And they came to counseling because Teresa felt very upset that he took her phone and threw it in the water. But Bill felt very justified because, you see, in Bill's mind, Teresa was not submissive. He had told her that he really preferred that she not talk on the phone when he was home. He rationalized to himself that she had lots of time during the day. She stayed at home and she worked in her own business. And so she had time to talk on the phone all she wanted when he wasn't home. But when he got home, he wanted that time to be their time. And so therefore, phone use on her part was prohibited. Well, that night, Teresa had gotten a phone call from her sister, and she already knew her sister knew she shouldn't be on the phone. So she thought it must be a family emergency. And so she decided to answer the phone. And her sister was in a bit of a crisis. She was like me. She had technical problems, and she was calling her sister, Teresa, who was an expert in the computer, to get her some help to walk her through a problem. And Teresa helped her sister. But when she got off the phone, Bill was mad. They wrestled for her phone, and he threw it in the water because she didn't submit. Now, this gets real dicey. because around headship and submission questions, because we have to ask ourselves, being a woman, a wife in a marriage, does that mean that you have no choice of your own? That you can't make a choice to go to work or take college courses or to have friends over for a visit or to go see your family or talk on the phone? Can you not have the choice to cut your hair a certain way or to attend Bible study if you want to, or to make some financial choices for your own, or what to wear, what you can watch on TV or what you can read, who you can talk to? Are these choices not yours to make? Do you feel more like a child in your marriage or sometimes even a slave? Jason Meyer, the new pastor at Bethlehem Baptist Church, which was John Piper's former church, talks about this hyper headship, this whole submissive hyper head where I'm the head and you have to do what I want. And he says this: hyper headship is a satanic distortion of male leadership, but it can fly under the radar of discernment because it's disguised as strong male leadership. But make no mistake, it's harsh, oppressive, and controlling. In other words, hyper-headship becomes a breeding ground for domestic abuse. And so just real briefly, headship, biblically, does not mean you get your own way. It doesn't mean that you get to make all the final choices. It doesn't mean that you get to be the bully leader. In fact, Jesus was really clear to his disciples what headship meant when he taught his disciples. Hey, you guys are going to be the future leaders of my church. This is what headship looks like. If you want to be the leader, and what did he do? He got down on his knees and he washed their dirty feet. So Jesus himself defines headship as servanthood. If you want to be the head, you get to serve first. You get to lead and model servanthood. Headship doesn't mean that you get to control someone else's life, that you get to make all of their decisions, that you get to squash and take away their no, their choice, their voice. And so when you feel controlled and that you have absolutely no choice and no voice, and you can't make your own decisions for yourself as an adult in a relationship that's supposed to be mutual, that's one of the big red flags of a destructive marriage. The second red flag is that you regularly feel afraid. Perhaps there's been some physical abuse, threats of physical abuse, raging, broken doors, holes in walls. One woman's husband lit their garage on fire. And that is pretty darn scary to live with day after day. But maybe he's never hit you or broken things. But let's say that there's chronic financial mismanagement, deceit, hiding and manipulation of family funds, and you have no idea what back taxes you may owe or how much they are. And you live afraid that the IRS or some other institution will catch up with him and your family will be devastated and destitute. Or maybe there's huge questions about your husband's sexual integrity. Maybe you've been given a sexually transmitted disease, although he claims it wasn't from him. And you feel scared to trust or be intimate because you don't know where he's been or who he's been with. Or maybe you feel afraid because your own health is deteriorating. You've been diagnosed with chronic autoimmune disease that has made you more and more dependent. And the stress of living in this destructive marriage is taking its toll on your mental and emotional and physical health. You're depressed and feel afraid you're having thoughts of ending your life. Or you're over-medicating yourself with prescription drugs and alcohol just to cope with staying in this marriage. You're afraid of who you're becoming and what's happening to you in the midst of trying to stay in this relationship. You feel afraid. The third red flag is you feel confused. You never know when or if your spouse is really telling you the truth a lot of the time. You feel a little crazy when you thought you agreed to something and then find out he says that ever happened. Let me give you an example. I worked with a woman named Mary who said that she and her husband agreed that they would each call each other if they were going to be late. Actually, she never had that problem. It was her husband who typically didn't call her. And so out of frustration, she made this agreement with him that he would call her when he was late because she was tired of holding dinner and the kids were all hungry and he never let her know she was going to be late from work. And so she'd get frustrated and angry and then she wouldn't respond well. So one day again, and he was late and he wasn't calling. And so when he got home from work, she was just really mad. And she said, you know what? We made this agreement that you would call. He goes, oh, you're just being controlling. She goes, I'm not controlling. You agreed. I never agreed. She's feeling confused. I thought we agreed. I'm not controlling. Why am I controlling when we've agreed to this? You start to feel really crazy inside. Or maybe you know something is wrong or off. You just feel it in your gut. But your husband keeps denying it or twisting it around, making it look like you were the crazy one. In Facebook Live last Monday, I talked about this crazy making cycle, and just let me summarize it for you, but I would highly encourage you to go back and just watch the longer video. There are 3 stages to kind of crazy making. The first stage is the disbelief cycle. Kind of you're scratching your head saying, we just had this conversation, but what happened? Like, did this really happen this way? It didn't happen this way. I must have just misread it. I must have misunderstood. Maybe he's just tired. It didn't really happen this way, did it? So you're just not quite sure what happened, but you're in this disbelief. Like, did he really say that? Is this what I heard? No, I couldn't have heard that. And the second stage is that you start defending yourself, because every time you bring something up, just like Mary did with her husband when he was late, he began to attack her. You're being controlling. Well, that's not true. I'm not being controlling. That's not who I am. That's not what I think. I don't feel like I should control you. I just thought we made an agreement. But the topic isn't about the agreement anymore. It's about you defending your character. That's not who I am. That's not true. I'm not controlling. I'm not selfish. I didn't think I was selfish. And now the next stage is you start to doubt yourself and lose yourself. Like, am I selfish? Am I controlling? I don't know who I am anymore. Maybe I am who he thinks I am. Again, so let me just go through this. Is it me? What am I doing wrong? That's not who I am. Is that who I am? These behaviors are often so covert, you don't see them happening. But it manipulates you into not trusting your own thoughts, your own feelings, decisions, or judgments. Now, don't minimize these seemingly lesser types of controlling behavior. I talk about this in my book, but it's like 1,000 bee stings. 1 bee sting isn't a big deal unless you're allergic to bees. But over time, if you've been stung by 1,000 bees, it can become really destructive to the health of the marriage, as well as the person getting all the bee stings. So you feel confused, you feel controlled, you feel afraid. Sound familiar? The next one is you feel disrespected, demeaned, and dismissed. Your priorities, your feelings, your thoughts, your goals don't matter. You're put down, you're invalidated, verbally battered, and emotionally exploited. You exist to serve him and make him and your children's lives work. And there's little concern for your own welfare, including by your own self or your own happiness. And last but certainly not least, you feel objectified. There is no you in your marriage. You are a role. You're a wife, a maid, a chauffeur, a mom, a provider, a sex object. You exist solely to meet the needs of the other person. You feel like a body to use, not a person to love. Who you are, what you need, how you feel, what you think or want does not matter to your partner. What matters is you fulfilling your role and meeting his needs, wants, or preferences. Sorry, guys, if there's some men here and are feeling the same way, you certainly can feel that way too. But I'm talking mostly to women because women are mostly my audience. So I hope you don't feel offended by my gender use. It does happen to men as well. You can feel like a paycheck and a non-person as well in a marriage. But when you step out of that role and you want something for yourself, you have a price to pay. But as long as you perform your role or your duties, that's all that's wanted or needed from you. So let me ask you a question. Right now, if you and I could sit down and have a cup of Starbucks or maybe an ice cream cone and just have a chat, what are you seeing right now about your marriage and about yourself? Where are you right now? And what would you say are your biggest challenges in this marriage that you're in? And type your response in the chat box. I really want to know, even though you and I can't sit down and talk right now, I do want to be able to answer your questions. And so by you giving me those responses, I'm going to develop some future Facebook Live times, as well as webinar and classes to help you on what some of your biggest challenges are. All right. Okay. So another way of discerning the health or the dysfunction of a relationship is to look at the elements of a healthy marriage, much like bankers study real $100 bills so they can more easily see the fraudulent ones. If we can understand what God intended for a healthy marriage to look like, we can be more astute at recognizing when our marriage is not healthy or destructive. You see, a healthy marriage is not a perfect marriage, but it is a loving partnership, not a slave-master or parent-child relationship. Conflict involves solving a problem, not attacking a person, because conflict's part of every healthy relationship. And damages, when they happen, because they might happen even in a healthy marriage, they're not ignored, but they're repaired through confession, restitution, and real change. You see, all marriages have sinful interactions at times. However, when you're a healthy person and you realize that you've done something that's hurt your partner, when you see the pain on their face or the fear in their eyes or the bruise on their body, or they tell you again and again and again that something's bothering them, in a healthy marriage, you don't ignore that. You don't keep doing the same wrong thing over and over again. You listen, you stop, you change, you realize you've crossed the line and done damage to your partner and your marriage. And this damage cannot be ignored or swept under the rug or minimized or pushed off as no big deal or something your spouse caused. Instead, you own it, you take responsibility for it, and you make repairs, whatever that takes. So let me quickly go over the ingredients necessary for healthy relationships. And they are mutuality, reciprocity, and freedom. Mutuality means that there are mutual ingredients that both of you bring to this relationship. And I would say if it's a marriage, it's mutual caring, honesty, mutual respect, mutual responsibility, and mutual repentance. If there's not mutuality in this relationship, it doesn't mean it's not some sort of relationship, but it's not a good marriage relationship. It might be something called ministry. Let me give you an example. I was speaking at Liberty University, and one of the students said, I'm getting a little resentful of my roommate. I'm trying to be a servant as Christ calls me to, and I'm trying to serve him, but I'm starting to feel a little taken advantage of. He was sick, and I brought him soup. I've often shared my notes with him when we share the same classes. He borrows my car because he doesn't have one. I did his laundry one time. But, last week when I was sick, he didn't offer to bring me soup, and he never does anything for me. And I'm starting to get really tired of this servant role. Am I supposed to just suck it up and be a servant? Or do I have a reason to feel resentful? I'm starting to feel guilty about my resentment. And what I said to him is, if you want a real relationship with your roommate, if you want a friendship, there needs to be some mutuality here, because otherwise you have a ministry to him, but your ministry actually is enabling him to be more selfish and lazy in this roommate relationship that you have. And is that really good for him? Tim Keller writes in his teaching on marriage that the Christian teaching on marriage does not offer us a choice between fulfillment and sacrifice, but rather mutual fulfillment through mutual sacrifice. The second ingredient in a healthy marriage or a healthy relationship is reciprocity. And that means that power and responsibility are shared in marriage, that the rules and the responsibilities that are made in the marriage are decided by both and applied to both, not just to one person. There's a lack of reciprocity in a marriage when I expect you to respect me, but I don't respect you. Or I expect you to call me and tell me where you are, but I don't have to do that for you. Or I expect you to check with me about spending money, but I spend money as I please without having to check in with you. The Apostle Paul writes about reciprocity with churches and church relationships. And this is what he says. He says, I do not mean that others should be eased like the Liberty University student and you burdened, but that as a matter of fairness, your abundance at the present time should supply their need so that their abundance may supply your need, that there may be fairness. You see, a healthy relationship needs that reciprocity to go back and forth. And the last ingredient for a healthy relationship is the freedom to be yourself, to speak up, to share your feelings, to disagree without feeling afraid, to be able to make a decision for yourself without having a price to pay. So in summary, a healthy adult relationship is one in where both people in the relationship give and both people in the relationship receive. There's a safe and open exchange of ideas, feelings, and thoughts, and all perspectives are considered and valued. And there's also the freedom to respectfully challenge, confront, and strengthen one another. In contrast, emotionally destructive marriage is one in where one's personhood, dignity, and freedom of choice is regularly denied, criticized, or crushed. This can be done through words, behaviors, economics, attitudes, and yes, even misusing the scriptures. Now, if you're still not sure whether you're in an emotionally destructive relationship, I want to give you a link where you can take a free test on my website at leslievernick.com/the-emotionally-destructive-marriage/assessment. Okay? And so if you just go there, there's a test, you can take it right there, and that will help you. So when the line is crossed and crossed and crossed again, what makes this destructive marriage or destructive relationship unable to heal? What makes this marriage unable to be repaired? It is not the brokenness. It's not the sinfulness, because there are many marriages that bad things happen where there's adultery or there's deceit or something really awful happened. And those couples seem to be able to make repairs. So what's going on in a destructive marriage that it does not heal? And this is what happens. There is a blindness to their brokenness. They're not willing to see what they've done. A destructive person is too prideful to see, much like the Pharisees. They're not willing to confess their wrongdoing. And this is a key. They're not willing to get the help they need to stop. The Bible tells us some powerful things. It says unacknowledged and unrepentant sin separates us from God and from one another. So often we have misused unconditional love to mean unconditional relationship. But God does not have unconditional relationship with people. If we just think of a very simple story from the Bible, when Jesus was on the cross, there were two individuals there. He loved them both because we know God so loved the world that he gave his only son to die for these two individuals. There were two thieves on each side of them. One was destructive. He was mocking him. The other was repentant for his thievery. Jesus had a relationship with one when he said, "Today you're going to see me and be with me in paradise." He did not have a relationship with the other. Sometimes we have put an inordinately unfair burden on Christians to somehow maintain a relationship with a destructive person when it is impossible. We can love that person. God calls us to. He calls us to even love our enemies. But he does not require us to have a relationship with them of closeness. Jesus doesn't, and he doesn't expect us to either. So I promise you I'd tell you what the Bible says about abuse, because oftentimes you hear things. I've heard things from pastors and well-meaning church leaders who say the Bible doesn't speak about emotional abuse, so let's not use those words. Well, that's not true. The Bible does speak about emotional abuse. Let me give you some proof. Proverbs 11:9 says, with their what? Words, the godless destroy their friends. Not their fists, but their words. In Proverbs 12:18, it says, reckless words pierce like a sword. Now, these two verses alone shatter that nursery rhyme that says, sticks and stones will break my bones, but what? Words will never hurt me, right? It's not true, and it's not in the Bible. The Bible tells us that words do hurt, and that we are not to use our words to hurt one another. For example, Proverbs 18:21 says, life and death is in the power of the tongue. Galatians 5:15 says, if you're always biting and devouring one another, watch out, you will destroy each other. Ephesians says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behaviors. 3:8 says, but now is the time to get rid of anger, rage, malicious behavior, slander, and dirty language. And finally, James 3 says this, no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless and evil, full of deadly poison. Sometimes it praises our Lord and Father, and sometimes it curses those who have been made in the image of God. And so blessing and cursing come pouring out of the same mouth. Surely, my brothers and sisters, this is not right. And so maybe that's where you're at. Your spirit is becoming crushed and you feel drained and depleted, totally unloved. And this is from a person who promised to love you. We might think that the Bible doesn't say much about the effects of emotional abuse, but it does. For example, Psalm, it says, your tongue cuts like a sharp razor. You're an expert at telling lies. You love evil more than good and lies more than truth. You love to what? Destroy others with your words, you liar. And how about this one? Psalm 55. Please listen and answer me, for I am overwhelmed by my troubles. My heart pounds in my chest. He's having anxiety. The terror of death assaults me. Fear and trembling overwhelm me. I can't stop shaking. It's affecting him physically. It's not an enemy who taunts me. I could bear that. It's not my foes who so arrogantly insult me. These are words I could have hidden from them. Instead, it's you. It's my equal, my companion, my close friend. And lastly, Psalm 69 says, their insults have broken my heart, and I am in despair. Friend, emotional abuse systematically degrades, diminishes, and can eventually destroy the personhood of the other. And 1 in 4 Christian women report being in an emotionally destructive marriage. Is this you? Is this you? Daniel Goleman, a secular psychologist, says this. He says, when someone dumps their toxic feelings on us, explodes in anger or threats, shows disgust or contempt, they activate in us a circuitry for the very same distressing emotions. That's why you need help and support so you don't become like the very thing you hate. See, the Bible tells us that bad company corrupts good morals. And when we live around emotionally abusive and angry people, it either crushes us or it can make us become just like them. And that is not God's best for you. The consequences of living in an emotionally destructive marriage are not just physical and emotional. They're mental, relational, spiritual, and even generational. I want to ask you a question and answer on the chat. How many of you are seeing the negative effects on your kids? You see, the Bible warns us that the sins of the father are passed down to the next generation. And what can you do about that? What's next? Well, there seems to be 2 choices that Christian women are typically given. 1, try harder. Try harder to make him happy. Try harder to love or respect him more. Try harder to pray for him. Try harder to submit. Or the other option is just, you know what? This is your calling to suffer for Jesus. Try harder or suffer more. So let's look a little bit about what's wrong with trying harder. Now, in a normal marriage, trying harder might be very good advice, but not in a destructive relationship. Let me give you 3 quick reasons why this is a bad decision. So if you're getting counseling to try harder, this is not going to help. It's only going to make things worse. First of all, it gives you false hope that if you try harder, you can fix this. If you just do the right thing, if you just figure out what buttons not to push, if you just say it right, if you just love him enough, if you just are patient and suffer quietly without a word, somehow he's going to wake up and love you and become the husband that you think he can become. It doesn't happen. Why? Because it feeds 2 of his lies when you keep trying harder. The first lie it feeds him is that it gives him the impression that you agree with him. You are the problem. And if only you would get it right, if only you would try harder, if only you would love him enough, if only you would stop bugging him, that he'd be fine. He wouldn't have lost his temper. He wouldn't be the way he is if only you could get your act together. But that's not true because you can never be a perfect woman. And so it reinforces his entitlement that he's entitled to a fantasy wife, not a real person who has her own needs and her own feelings and her own sins, but this fantasy woman who is never going to disappoint him, who's always going to be there for them, that there is no real you there. You're just a Stepford wife to meet his need all the time. And that's not healthy for him or for you. What's wrong with suffering for Jesus? I wish I had a whole hour to unpack that statement, but I'm going to give you a couple clues. First of all, if you go to my Facebook page on 420 and 424, go back and watch them because I unpacked them more fully there. But I'm also going to follow up this webinar with a couple of videos for you, and one of them will be unpacking that 1 Peter passage that pastors often use for women in destructive marriage, saying that Peter says that you're just supposed to be quiet, submit more, and suffer for Jesus. But hang on just a bit because I am going to talk about it when I talk about biblical love. But tonight I want to show you 5 things that you must do right now, starting today, if you're in a destructive marriage. And the very first thing is that you need to do is to prioritize safety. Prioritize safety. The Bible tells us the prudent, the wise see danger and take refuge. Now, you might wonder why safety? Because your safety is important to God. Your safety is important to God. Your marriage isn't the most important thing to God, despite what you might hear from other Christian professionals. Your safety is. God values your marriage for sure, and he values your marriage covenant, but he also values your safety. And when there's two competing values, we have to decide, what does God value more? Let me give you a couple of illustrations. In the Ten Commandments, God values truth-telling. He tells us in the Ten Commandments, do not bear false witness. That's important to God. But in the Old Testament, there was a prostitute named Rahab. And when the Jewish spies were spying out the promised land, she actually lied to her own people to keep them hidden so that they wouldn't be caught and killed. And we find later in Hebrews, in the Hall of Fame, in Hebrews 11 and 12, that Rahab was honored for her courageous stand in not telling the truth, not for any bad reason, but for a good reason, to keep the spies safe. Let me give you another illustration. God values obeying the law and obeying the people above you in authority over you. He tells us to do that in his word. And yet, when David was under King Saul's authority and he found out that Saul was plotting to kill him, he didn't just say, well, God, I guess I'm just going to obey and trust you and submit and suffer for you and see what Saul does and just trust you to protect me. He didn't. He trusted God, but he fled King Saul. And God never disciplined or said that that was wrong, that it was right. In fact, another example would be when baby Jesus was born. Now, we know the story because it tells us in Luke that Herod was jealous of baby Jesus because he heard from the wise man that this was the king of the Jews. And so he wanted to kill all the babies under the age of 2. And he was seeking to find Jesus so that he could kill him. And God woke Joseph up in a dream, and he didn't say, so I want you to obey the authorities because that's important to me. What he said was, I want you to flee. I want you to move so that you're protecting Jesus. Safety was a more important value to God in those stories. And even when the Pharisees were trying to pin Jesus down on breaking the Sabbath, Jesus said to them, which one of you, if your child or even your ox fell into a well, wouldn't break the Sabbath in order to pull them out? Safety was important to Jesus for the ox as well as for a child. And so we're not just talking about your physical safety here, as if you're going to be killed. That's the only way that you can take refuge. I'm also talking perhaps about your financial safety, your sexual safety, your emotional safety, your mental and spiritual safety. We hear that God hates divorce, but let's be clear what God says in this verse in Malachi 2:16. This is how the NIV translates it. And this is a new translation because that wasn't quite translated accurately. It says, God hates a man who hates and divorces his wife, says the Lord, the God of Israel. One who does violence to the one he should protect, says the Lord God Almighty. Also, God hates some other things. He hates a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked, feet that are swift in running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among the brethren. Sounds like many of you might be in that kind of marriage. God hates it. So let me ask you a question. Does Jesus value the sanctity of marriage above the safety and sanity of the individuals in it? Glorify God for you to be a martyr and suffer for Jesus to enable your destructive spouse to continue to sin against you and your children? I don't think so. And you might be thinking I'm an advocate for divorce, but nothing could be further from the truth. I'm an advocate for healthy marriages and healthy families. I'm an advocate for what's true and good and right. I'm an advocate for promoting the biblical ideal that marriage is to represent a powerful picture of Christ and his bride. And when the marriage actually displays the opposite of oppressor and oppressed, that marriage does not glorify God, nor is it healthy and good. The first goal is not to divorce, but to heal. But if you're not safe, you can't heal. And you do have other biblical options than just trying harder or suffering for Jesus. And I want to share the rest of those biblical options. The second thing I want you to do is put your marriage in its proper place. I want to be honest with you here. It bothers me that so many women are told that they need to put their marriage and their man as their highest priority. I'm going to tell you something different here. You must put your marriage in its proper place, and that takes it out of the number one place. You see, as Christian women, we have often been taught to be husband-centered or marriage-centered women and see that as a good thing. But it is not. It is idolatry. Instead, we're learning to be a God-centered woman, not a husband-centered woman or a marriage-centered woman. One woman said to me, she said, "The only thing I did is follow God. First, I was being shown that my unhealthy attachment to my husband was idolatry. I repented of that and prayed that he be broken, knowing full well that it might mean the end of our marriage." Also, in this place, or this step of putting your marriage in its proper place, I want you to begin to clarify your role. What does it mean to be a biblical helpmate? Well, it's to meet your husband's needs, but let me ask you a question. What does he need from you the most right now? Does he need from you to enable him to continue to sin with no consequences? To prop him up and collude with his delusion that he's fine? Or is it something more risky and redemptive? And this is where it takes us to what is biblical love. Yes, biblical love is sacrificial, and it may involve some sort of suffering and sacrifice. But hear me here. Biblical love, as well as suffering and sacrifice, is always directed toward doing something that will lead to someone's good, not to enable them to stay destructive and harmful. So let me ask you another question. What is in your husband's best interest right now? And it's not to collude with his delusion that he's entitled to the perks of a great relationship while all he sows in it is weeds. When you put your marriage in its proper place, you can begin to do what you can do and let go of the outcome, a good marriage. A woman said, "I can be a godly person, a godly wife. I can do that. I can't make a good marriage all by myself." So how does a godly woman handle a destructive person? Does she enable it, or does she speak up about it? Ephesians 5 tells us that we're to not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but rather we're to expose them. So what's the next thing you can do? Prioritize safety, put your marriage in its proper place. Third, you need to start to identify the lies that you believe and learn what's true. Here are some common lies that women have been told. If he doesn't hit you, it isn't abuse. We've already learned that it's not true. There's no such thing as emotional abuse in the Bible. We've already learned that that's not true. You're both sinners. Stop judging his sin as worse than yours. You're not judging his sin, but what you're saying is, I'm not going to enable this silently. I'm going to speak out and against it, just like Jesus tells you to in Matthew 18. If someone sins against you, talk to them. See if there can be repairs made to the relationship. If not, bring it to the church. See if there can be repairs made to the relationship. If not, the relationship is broken. God hates divorce more than he hates abuse is another lie that you've been told. But I've already told you that God hates many things. It never says in the scripture that he hates divorce. What he says, he hates a man who divorces his wife and treats her treacherously. We've already tackled some of these lies in this webinar, but what about the lies that you tell yourself, such as, it must be something I'm doing. It's my fault. Or if only I try harder, he will change. Or God wants me to stay no matter what. Or if I leave, God will punish me. Or it's better for the children for me to stay. Or I can't live alone. I'm too afraid. Or if only I could get through to him, he'd be a great person. Or how about no one else would want me? Or I don't deserve to be treated better. Or there must be something wrong with me that he would treat me this way, especially when he treats everyone else so great. This is normal. I don't know any different. Or this, I must suffer quietly for Christ. See, friend, God's word tells us that transformation or change begins when we renew our mind with the truth. It tells us in Romans 12:2 that we are transformed. How? By the renewing of our mind. And Jesus tells us that we will know the truth. And when we know the truth, what? It will set us free. Psalm 107:20 says this, He sent out His word and healed them and delivered them from their destruction, from the lies that we've been told, the lies that we believe. And it's crucial, absolutely crucial right now, that if you want to get healthy, that you, fourthly, learn to think like an owner instead of a victim. Now, when I say this, I'm not saying that people, including you, have not been a victim of horrible things. You have. But if you want to stop being a victim or being re-victimized again and again and again, you need to learn to think differently. Even in horrible situations, a victim of rape or robbery, injustice, or tragedy can and must learn to think like an owner or a steward of her life. She must begin to ask herself, what can I learn from this experience? How can I grow from this? Not just get through it, but how can I grow from it? How can I learn to be a better person? What do I need to change? How do I need to get stronger, saner, healthier? How do I better protect myself? How do I need to get clearer? You see, an owner determines how to respond to a situation. Victims, people who think like victims, just react. I don't have any choices. It's happening to me. Owners decide the kind of person they are going to become in the midst of adversity, in the midst of suffering. Victim thinkers allow life to determine the person she becomes. Owners shape circumstances to create new outcomes. People who think like victims allow circumstances to shape them, and they feel helpless to do anything different. They feel stuck. Owners are problem solvers who take action and devise strategies. In order to do that, you have to begin to educate yourself on healthy and unhealthy relationship patterns. You may have grown up with some of this stuff in your family of origin. You might think it's normal, and it might be normal for you, but it's still not healthy. It's not good, and we don't want to pass down generational unhealthiness and destructiveness to the next generation. And so knowledge helps you not do that, because the biggest fear many of you have right now is that your kids will be damaged if you leave. But we also have to recognize that they may also be damaged if you stay. What are they learning is normal in your household? How does a man treat a woman? How does a woman handle being treated that way? And those of you who have grown up kids, let me ask you a question and answer on the chat. Was it better that you stayed? Or do you wish you would have left? Put your answers in the chat box so that other women who were wondering might learn from your experience. The Apostle Paul says that we are not to be overcome by evil, but we're to overcome evil with good. How? How do we do that? Well, we can do that by beginning to build internal strength. A lot of the work I do with women in destructive marriages is helping them build their core. You know, when you have core strength physically, you can stand straight, right? You have good balance. You have internal muscles that hold your back straight and your belly in. But when you don't have core strength, you start to slouch over. That you can't hold your belly in. You can't keep your back straight. You don't have enough internal strength. And so here are 4 things that help build your core. Core is an acronym for number 1, C, being committed to truth. No more pretending. I'm not covering for things anymore. I'm going to be honest about what's going on, both inside of me and inside of my home. Oh, I'm going to be open. I need to learn, to change, to grow. God is not calling me just to be a victim in this situation, but I need to take this situation and now grow from it, learn from it, change, do what I can do to be the person God calls me to be in this moment. R, I need to be responsible for myself and respectful toward others, including my destructive spouse, without dishonoring myself. And E, how do I stay empathic? Because God calls me to care and be compassionate toward others without enabling destructive behavior to continue. This is extremely important. Otherwise, bad company affects you and sometimes begins to turn you into the very person you hate. You start over-functioning, trying to fix everybody, being responsible for everyone, and neglecting your own stewardship of your own life. So before I go on, what have been some of the aha moments for you during this workshop? Post them in the chat. What are you going like, oh my gosh, I should have known that. I wish I would have known that. What do I need to do? What have you seen as an aha moment? And just write it in the chat so I can see it. One person said, "It's not, my aha moment is I see it's not better for the kids. My kids have been damaged by what's happened." What other aha moments? I see the crazy making. That really opened my eyes. Putting my marriage in its proper place. That was a new thought. Yeah. Understanding how not to think like a victim. Yeah, I tend to think like a victim rather than owner. The Bible does talk about emotional abuse. Aha moment. Oh, I'm so glad you're getting these aha moments. God is so good, and he tells us so much about how to be healthy. Imagine how you could feel if you could learn to speak the truth in love. Take responsibility for yourself while being respectful to your husband, part of core strength. Recognize destructive patterns and respond to them in a firm yet godly way. Imagine how you'd feel if you could establish appropriate boundaries and consequences with destructive behavior. You'd feel empowered. You'd feel strong. You'd feel capable, not broken and helpless and scared, wouldn't you? So we've talked about, number one, get safe. Make that your priority. Put your marriage in its proper place. Become a God-centered woman, not a husband-centered woman. Identify the lies you believe and learn to transform your thinking by taking responsibility and thinking like an owner, not a victim. And last but not least, it is crucial, if you want help, is to get support. You see, one of the tactics of emotionally abusive people is to isolate you so that the only words you hear are their words, and you start to feel defective. You start to feel alone. You start to feel like maybe what they're saying is true about you. It's really important that you find people that you can share with, that you can be honest with, that you can learn from. And you have to be honest with those people to talk about what's really happening. Also, research is now showing that trauma is best talked about in a group of others who know what you're going through. A group can help you face your fears, find your voice, and strategize how and when to speak up to your destructive husband, your church leaders, your Christian counselor, who have long ignored what's going on. You see, friend, it's not enough to know the truth. You have to learn to walk in it, even when it's painful, even when it's hard, and especially when you're scared to do it. And we all need supportive, godly others who will help us on this journey. You need people who don't question the validity of your story or clobber you with Bible verses about how God hates divorce or just turn the other cheek one more time. You need people who are caring and compassionate, yet strong and wise enough to give you a little nudge now and then so you don't get stuck in your anger or your pain and you keep moving forward. But I also know that not everyone who needs that extra support can always afford private one-on-one coaching or individual counseling, and they may not have the opportunity to join Bible study groups or don't have a safe church that they can disclose. So I would love the opportunity to continue our work together, and I want to share with you how. So I want to invite you to join Conquer. Conquer's been closed for 6 months, but we're opening it up tonight. And Conquer will help you hear from God in a brand new way, to live from a place of strength and health and not desperation. Conquer will help you get stronger and more confident, to stop being victimized again and again. Conquer will help you steer clear of manipulative games and crazy-making conversations, and to gain freedom from bitterness and resentment. Also to learn how to make good choices and follow through with those choices, to discover your voice and express it honestly, yet respectfully, and to give you the courage to say, I won't live like this anymore. Sound amazing? It is. Conquer is amazing. I am so blessed to be a part of it. Let me just share with you some people who just made some comments about Conquer that shared them with me. Shelley said, today I'm no longer that wounded woman in a withering relationship thanks to Conquer and the work of the Holy Spirit. I was wonderfully made and I am wonderfully restored, and so was my marriage, although both are works in progress. I am a woman of worth, a warrior, better equipped for emotional and spiritual battle in this world. I am not crushed by my fears. I conquer my fears. I am not defeated by my circumstances. I am victorious because I have learned to conquer, not cower. I love that. And Lori said, Conquer really helped me as I've been separated from my husband since August 2014. And I've struggled with guilt that I couldn't work on my issues very well while living with him. But I realized that sometimes we do have to step away to see the picture clearer. And I'm seeing myself clearer in what I need to work on. Thanks for the teaching. And Wanda says, this group has been a blessing from God at the worst time of my life. The support has been phenomenal for women who truly understand what you're going through. The fact that Leslie, even responds to Facebook posts is amazing. The monthly calls have been tremendous help to me. And now there's 2 calls a month. These phone calls are truly wonderful coaching sessions. And I feel that Leslie's wisdom, compassion, and Christian heart is displayed on each phone call. I'm thankful she's made all this available, no matter where you live. So you might be wondering if Conquer's for you. So Conquer's a perfect fit for you if you are a woman. Sorry, no men allowed. Maybe someday a man will start a group for men in destructive marriages. I don't think it'll be me, but this is just a group for women who are sick and tired of being stuck and feeling helpless. It's a perfect fit for you if you don't like who you are becoming in this destructive marriage, whether you're becoming aggressive and mean and bitter, or you're becoming small and childlike and depressed. And you're ready to grow and become all that God has for you. It's perfect for you if you're ready to invest in yourself for a change. Conquer will just give you the continued small bite learning environment that I talked about, because you do need to know how to form healthier relationships, how to stop over-functioning or under-functioning, how to be less dependent, and develop the strength to say no when you need to without cowering under the fear that someone might be disappointed or angry with you. Conquer is also an opportunity for you and I to regularly connect through video, through a private support group, and by telephone each month so that you can gain clarity, confidence, courage, as well as some practical tools and moving beyond stuck and into freedom. Margaret Whitley says this. She says, without reflection, we go blindly on our way, creating more unintended consequences and failing to achieve anything useful. So it's time for you to reflect. How are things going for you? Listen to a few more other women who've been a part of Conquer. Kathy said this, it's so helpful to know that there are so many others sharing our experiences. No, not exactly, but similarly. And it helps give me the courage some days to face another day. And the resources available through the knowledge and experience of others on this site is absolutely priceless. The prayer, support, and focus on doing the right thing, even though it's hard or scary, is incredible. I am so grateful for this place to share my frustrations and help encourage others. Pam said this, such sweet, helpful counsel. Wherever the Spirit of God is, there is liberty. And that's what I hear Leslie talking about in this one, the freedom to be a human being who needs God. What she says draws me to what Jesus has done. What a relief. It lifts up the cross in my mind, drawing me toward the freedom of the Christian life, of yieldedness instead of the temptation to try to remain in control and become my own judge. Thank you. From Pamela. And Lori said, I love your biblical teachings in all aspects, but the thing I appreciate about you the most is when listening to you speak with others, it's your amazing ability to respond to any conflict with a toxic person in such an effective yet compassionate and loving way, regardless of the circumstances. I'm so impressed with your choice of vocabulary, as it seems like you always know what exactly to say to help a woman stand up for herself in the midst of conflict while showing compassion and grace for the destructive individual. So, what do you get for being in Conquer? Well, you get 2 short, about 10-minute video teachings. So you don't have to sit and listen to a 40-minute video, about 10 or 15 minutes at max video each month with handouts so that you can immediately put into practice what I'm teaching you, such as how do I set boundaries? How do I learn to get over crazy making? How do I forgive? How do I conquer overwhelm? How do I conquer decision making? All kinds of teaching that we've done. And actually some Conquer ladies get together and they do these videos together so that they have that support group when they live near each other in a certain city or location. You also get 2 90-minute group phone calls every month, one on a Tuesday evening and one on a Monday afternoon. And they're recorded so that you can listen to them again and again. There's a secret Facebook page to connect with other women and get support. And help in setting this up is available if you're technologically challenged like I am. Also, Conquer ladies always get reduced prices on other group coaching that I do and classes that I teach. And when we're going to do a Conquer conference like we're going to do in 2018, I hope, you're going to get a reduced ticket price to the conference. If you're technologically challenged, let me show you what it looks like. So when you come to my website, you are going to put in your username and your password. Easy peasy, not hard. You're going to get a username and password so that when you go to leslievernick.com, you're going to go to the Conquer program, and then you're going to put in your username and password, and then you're going to be taken to a site that looks like this. Very easy, just a few buttons. The one on the left says current videos. So the current videos that we're doing for May 2017 will be in that box. And you just click that box. It'll show you what videos are for May. All right, and today, this video last week was on finding the right Christian counselor. All right, and then the video library is 2 years worth of videos that we have cataloged so that you say, I want to learn about boundaries, or I want to learn about making decisions, or I want to learn about self-care, all different kinds of topics that will help you get stronger, get safe, get sane, get clear. Also, you have all kinds of buttons here, monthly call information. I've done some book reviews for you on things that are important, how to download your materials, bonus materials that we have, other interviews with people, different videos. We have our videotapes from 2016 Conquer Conference and private Facebook group information. So everything is pretty easy peasy to navigate, and you'll be able to get to it really quickly if you struggle with Conquer. So I would just highly encourage you to join Conquer because it gives you the ability to live from a place of emotional and spiritual health instead of a place of desperation for any form of love. It gives you a community of godly, like-minded women who get you and know what challenges you face and who will support you and pray for you. You'll get the confidence to know without a shadow of a doubt that God doesn't value the sanctity of marriage more than your safety or sanity. And you also get night and day prayer support. These Conquer ladies are from all over the world, and they're up all the time or sleeping different times. And so when you need prayer, there is always someone there for you. And you get the freedom from the cycle of lashing out and reacting to being provoked so that you can stop feeling so bad about yourself. You can gain a greater peace of mind so that you're no longer feeling alone and unstable and confused or depressed and angry so much of the time, as well as good information, biblical teaching on how to make good choices and how to follow through with those teachings. So now what? You get to decide. And here are your choices. You can do nothing. And you've heard the definition of craziness, right? Insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for different results. And so, friend, if you do what you've always done, you will get what you've always gotten. Is that okay with you? The second thing you can do is go it alone. Read what you can. Educate yourself. There's lots of stuff that you can read. Do it. It's good for you. And hope for the best. Or let me and other women help you. Get the value of community and support, as well as some amazing teaching and new tools on your relational tool belt. And because I am so committed to you and for you to get the help you need, I am also giving 10 full-year scholarships to Conquer. And if you need a scholarship because you can't afford it, please send an email to Martha. Martha's my assistant, martha@leslievernick.com, with your story and how you believe Conquer can help you and why the cost would be a hardship for you. Because Conquer is a monthly membership and it's not expensive. It's $27 a month. You can go to Starbucks for a month and you can pay more than $27. Or if you want to pay in full for a whole year, it's $270 for 12 months and you get 2 months free. And there's no risk because you can cancel at any time with 30 days notice. We have a very low cancellation rate because people know it's high value. There's no contract you have to sign and you can quit anytime. And there's a special bonus for all of you who sign up tonight during this webinar. I automatically in Conquer do phone calls every month for Conquer Women. But for those of you who are new, who sign up during this webinar, you will get an extra 90-minute phone call just for you, just for new members who sign up tonight. The reason for that, it'll help you get oriented and familiar with how things work. You get to ask me your questions. You'll be able to feel connected quickly with other new members. And this phone call will be Monday night, 7 o'clock Eastern Time on May 15th. And those of you who sign up during this webinar will get a special invite to this call. And it will also be recorded if you can't make it. Now, Conquer is only open to new members until midnight, May 12th, and then it will be closed again until October. So if you're interested, join now at our low introductory price of $27 a month. I've kept the prices of Conquer purposely low for a reason, because I want any woman and all women who need to be able to join. This is the charter price. We started at $27. I've never raised our rates. This is year 3. But what that means to you is as long as you're a member, the price will always stay $27 a month, even if I have to raise the prices at some point to pay for all the technology that we have to use to implement Conquer. And so if you're interested in Conquer, and I hope you are, it will bless you and it will help you. Click on the feed. Martha has put a link on there, and you'll be taken to the page to start your membership. And I can't wait to meet you on Facebook and talk with you on May 15th. So what I want to do now is switch back to the feed so I can talk to you in person with my face and answer your questions. So I'm going to get some technical help here so I don't press the wrong button. And I'm going to press this, and then I'm going to press this one. You sure? I think that's going to hang up. I think it's this one, stop screen sharing. I'm back here, close this. Okay, and then I'm going to turn this on. Oh my gosh, we did it. Hooray! Oh my gosh, we did it. We got through this whole webinar. I didn't make too many boo-boos with technology, so I am so happy. Now my dog's getting upset because I'm getting loud. Oh, welcome back. Welcome back. I want to answer your questions. I want to be available to answer any questions that you have based on what we've talked about tonight, or other things that if I can answer them, I'll try to answer them. So I'm going to look over to my feed and answer questions. So let me see. Our Nate is asking, if joint counseling doesn't work for a couple when one person isn't willing to look at their sin, what can someone do? Honestly, Nate, joint counseling doesn't work for people in emotionally destructive marriages for that very reason, because in order to do marital counseling or joint counseling, you need two willing clients. And oftentimes you have two people in the room, but you don't have two willing clients. You have one willing client, the spouse who wants things to change and wants to work on themselves and even can say, you know, I can own my part. Yes. Like Bill and Teresa, the guy who threw the cell phone in the water, you know, she was saying, you know I was disrespectful to him at times, and I know I shouldn't act that way. And, I want to be a better wife, but I want to work on those things. But Bill didn't want to work on anything because he didn't think he needed anything to work on other than he shouldn't have thrown the cell phone, but he won't do that again. But it really is Teresa's problem, and she just needs to try harder not to push his buttons. And so that's what happens in joint counseling. So I really don't recommend joint counseling for three reasons. One is if you don't feel safe, if you can't be honest. But the second reason is if you don't have two people who are actually doing the work. And even if you have two people who say they're willing to do the work, a lot of the work in a destructive marriage is not marital work, all right? It's individual work. So that when someone is destructive, they have a lot of lies of their own that they believe, like I'm entitled to the perks of a great relationship. You need to forgive and forget. And, I don't owe you anything. And all these lies that they believe. And that's not marriage stuff. Or I can lose my temper and you should just forgive and forget. And let's put the past behind us. They have a lot of things that they believe in their own head that they need to work on, because if that doesn't change, the marriage isn't going to change. And so the marriage work comes after the individual work, where someone learns to handle their emotions in a respectful, godly way. They learn to understand their triggers. They learn better self-control, and they learn better self-awareness. Because remember, we talked about that blindness. The blindness is what keeps someone from healing. And so destructive people don't want to see, and so they keep their eyes shut. Jesus says, if our eye is healthy, the whole body is full of light. But if the eye is unhealthy, the whole body is full of darkness. And then he says something really powerful. This is in Matthew 6. He says, and woe to the person whose eye thinks they see clearly, but really what they really have is darkness. Then how deep that darkness is. And that's the blind person. They sort of think they're seeing, but they're not seeing anything truthfully. And so that person is just not a good candidate for marriage work, because it gets murky, because it becomes marriage counseling. And then somehow it's her fault that she pushes my buttons, or his fault that he doesn't do something. And individual work is much more appropriate with a destructive person until they deal with those things and take responsibility for those things. And once they've had some track record of dealing with those things, then to put the marriage back together, yes, you would need to do marriage counseling, but you can't do marriage counseling before. It's like trying to fix a broken arm before you dealt with the heart attack, right? The patient's going to die. And so if you don't deal with what's going on in the heart of the abuser and you try to put the marriage back together, it's just, the marriage is going to die, right? It's still going to die. So if you deal with the heart issues and deal with the stuff that's going on in the heart of the abuser, you still have a broken leg in the marriage and you need to fix that. But that's not the first thing. All right, so I hope I answered that question. Tanya says, is Conquer useful if I've already left the marriage? Absolutely. We have a number of women in Conquer who have left their marriage and they are working on rebuilding their life. And so a lot of the tools, a lot of the videos that you get, plus I can't tell you the number of women who have not done their work of getting healthier. How do I set boundaries? How do I say no? How do I recognize an unhealthy person? And they've married a second person and they're in a second marriage or a third marriage, and it's destructive as well. And so part of thinking like an owner is saying, what do I need to learn from this experience, right? Whether you stay or you leave, I've got to learn something about me, not just about the other person. And so often women in destructive marriages or men are so focused on what the other person's doing wrong that they miss what they need to do to learn and what they need to do to grow. So Conquer is an opportunity for you to really take that and work with that for yourself. All right. My father passed away recently. Would Conquer help my mother heal? Conquer is specifically a support group for women in destructive marriages. So if she had a really good marriage, probably not. Grief Share would be another group that's in the churches that would help her heal. Conquer is a wonderful support for a very particular group of women. It's not for everybody. It's for you if you're in a woman in a marriage or out of a marriage that was destructive and you want to learn to get healthier. All right. In sexual addiction, trust is hard. Where can I find a safe support group? Yes, that's really hard. Trust is hard. Conquer's got a great deal of trust in that group. It's very hard to trust because the addict, is a liar. They don't lie. They lie. That's part of the addiction. Is you lie to cover up your addiction, right? And so there are some good support groups for women who are married to sexual addicts, secular as well as Christian. I don't have them off the top of my head. We do have a number of women in Conquer who are married to sexual addicts, so that's one support group. But there are others who are just tailored for that. Mine is broader because, of course, sexual addiction causes an emotionally destructive relationship for sure. But usually there's other elements of sexual addiction like the deceit, the control, the indifference. And so those are the things that women are really working on, not to change their husband necessarily, but to change themselves. But they often find that when they get stronger and they get empowered, either go south or they get better, right? Which is what your goal is. I mean, you're creating a crisis to get off of stuck land. And so you want to either let's move and let's get healthier and let's grow together and let's heal this marriage, or I'm not pretending, including, and placating with this anymore. I'm gonna get healthy. All right, let me get another question. What if my husband, Beth is asking, what if my husband has verbally indicated that he wants to change his abusive behaviors and reconcile with me, but I'm already completely emotionally detached? How can I be in a marriage? Oops, I just lost Beth. How can I be in a marriage? Leave right there. How can I be in a marriage when I'm not in love with the man or even find it hard to respect him? Okay. First of all, don't worry about the love part. Okay, that's not the part that you need to worry about right now. And certainly this is the caution that I give women in destructive marriages. You may need to emotionally detach in order for you to be safe emotionally, because when you keep staying desirous of their attention, their affection, their love, their support, their encouragement, and they keep knocking you over, it takes its toll. When you detach and you have no more expectations of that, it helps you stay better if you're choosing to stay. But your husband is saying he would like to change. And so what you might need to say is, words don't mean a whole lot anymore, and I need to see action. And so it might be that you don't worry about not loving him right at the moment. That's not your first task. You worry about getting healthy, letting go of bitterness, learning to handle yourself in a godly way, building strength and dignity as a Proverbs 31 woman, as your clothing, and see if he's going to do his work. If he does his work, then the next piece is, can this marriage be restored? And can we rebuild love and trust? But that's not, like I said, that's not the first part of the triage, because you can't rebuild trust with someone who's untrustworthy, right? Proverbs, I think 25:14 or somewhere in Proverbs 25, it says, putting trust or confidence in an unstable man is like walking with a broken foot or chewing on a broken tooth. In other words, stupid. Don't trust someone who's untrustworthy. And this is the biblical craziness that happens when, you just have to decide to trust. Well, no, you don't. You decide not to trust an untrustworthy person because they've already broken trust. They've already told you they lie to you, or they're uncaring, or they're not reliable, or they're not consistent in the person they are. They're Jekyll Hyde kind of person. So how can you trust a person like that? You don't even know who they are. And so in order to rebuild trust, there needs to be some real specific steps taken to rebuild that trust. And part of that needs to be amends making on the part of the one who broke trust, right? And so when I talk to women who are talking about rebuilding a broken relationship, sorry isn't enough. There needs to be specific behavior changes. And maybe I'll do a webinar. I just spoke last week for counselors on the roadmap to healing a destructive marriage, and we have 4 stages: safety, sanity, stability, and security. And so if there's no safety, for example, in marriage, if there's no truth telling, if there's not a respect for boundaries, if there's no self-control, there's no ability to speak up and be free, then you can't move to anything else because there's no safety. So that really has to be built back. And if someone hasn't done the internal work to know how to do that and to manage their emotions and self-control themselves when they're upset, then that's the work you need to do, not marital work, right? And so you can't do the next step till you do the next step to the next step. And really understanding that sequence of healing is really important for counselors. So I would not beat yourself up because you've lost affection, because it's really kind of impossible to feel warmth and affection for someone who has continuously mistreated you and hurt you. What we tend to feel is resentment and bitterness and anger. God calls us not to feel that way. So he says, put that off and forgive. And that helps us to feel more compassion or empathy, but not necessarily romantic love, because we've been really injured. And so I wouldn't worry about that at this point. I would just worry about getting healthy and seeing what he's going to do. And then you'll be clearer minded about what the next step is. All right. So let's see. What do you do when your husband financially sabotages the family? Can you financially sabotages the family, then plays dead, suffers from depression, headaches, backaches, and now doesn't work? This is a tough one. You know, that he's had a history of irresponsibility and laziness and mismanagement. And I guess I would say a couple things. If he is seeking help for his problem and seeking help for his depression and seeking work, then you might say, let me wait and see. If he's expecting for you to take care of him like a child, when he's an able-bodied man who doesn't want to get the help and doesn't want to put forth the effort, then God's word is pretty clear. It says, a man who won't support his family is worse than an unbeliever, and a man who won't work, don't let him eat. And so I don't think that a wife should overfunction and knock herself out. And I have a blog about this a couple weeks ago because a woman's husband was just like that. If you go on my blog, leslievernick.com/blog, she just knocked herself out to the point of getting sick, really sick, because her husband just didn't want to work and didn't want to work hard enough to support the family. And so she had to work harder and harder and harder, taking care of all the family and taking care of all the kids and taking care of all the money. And he's just hanging out, fooling around with other women, being a bum. And that's not God's picture of marriage by any stretch of the imagination. And I don't think that God calls her to support his sinfulness and enabling it by living with him with no consequences. So it might be time to say, you know, we're going to have to separate until you can get help for yourself and take responsibility for your health, for your depression, for your character, in your laziness, and work at a job that pays some money to support our family. And those are tough consequences, and we learn how to do that and why and how in Conquer. How do you deal with, let's see. Can you move it down a little bit? All right. Cecilia's asking, how do I help silently without him knowing? How do I get help silently without him knowing? Wait a minute. I just lost her now. Okay, I see it. There is no sorry or remorse, like it never happened, but the kids are scared now. He threw my cell phone last week, got in my face like he wanted to hit me. I would say, Cecilia, that if it's at that place, you have to prioritize safety. And I don't know, what you're afraid of, if you have to get a protection from abuse order, or you need to move out, or you need to call the authorities, or how to get help without him knowing. So it sounds like you're afraid that there's going to be dangerous consequences for you if he finds out. And so I would really encourage you to consult with the domestic violence shelter to develop a safety plan for yourself. Safety is the number one priority. I never, ever, ever want to hear about one of my Conquer ladies or anybody else I've worked with in the newspaper that they've lost their life because their abusive spouse did something crazy, and we read about it all the time. So if you're too afraid to speak up for yourself and say, hey, I need some counseling, or I need some coaching, or I'm going to join a support group, or this is something I want to do for me, if that's too scary to do because you're afraid of your safety, it's one thing if you're afraid he's going to be disappointed. He might be disappointed. It's time for you to think about what you need right now. But if you're afraid for your safety, if you do those things, then I don't know enough details to adequately advise you, but I would highly suggest that you consult with a domestic violence shelter, or you could call the domestic violence hotline at 1-800, I think it's 1-800-733-SAFE, SAFE. If not, that's not it. You can Google the domestic violence hotline, but I think it's 1-800-733-SAFE and get some help to strategize how you can get some help with getting safe. That's your first goal, okay? All right. Allie says his crazy making really affects my mental health, but I fear leaving will make things worse for my kids, plus destroy our small church plant. My husband is the pastor. What should I do? Oh, that makes me so sad. There's so many pastors who are unhealthy, and I'm not sure you would destroy your church plant. It sounds like if your husband is unrepentant and he's too proud to own his stuff, the church plant can't possibly grow and thrive under such a unhealthy environment. So without, and again, knowing more details, I would say that for you to stay quiet and collude with that wouldn't be helpful for him. It wouldn't be helpful for your marriage, and it's not helpful for your church plant. I'm not saying to go to the elders or put on Facebook that my husband's a pastor and he's a crazy maker. But I am saying that right now you need to take care of you, and that means that you need to get equipped to get healthy and strong enough in core strength to have a conversation with your husband so that you don't get wrapped up in the crazy cycle. And you need help on how to do that so that you don't get lost in his craziness, so that he sees, oh, she's not doing this anymore. She's not buying this anymore. She's not letting me manipulate her anymore. She's not letting me, scare her anymore by my crazy talk. And as you start dancing that dance differently, it's going to create some momentum for change. It's called a crisis, right? And in that crisis, sometimes there's a window for him to wake up. And so that's what I would suggest that you do, that colluding and staying silent just because you don't want the church plant to go downhill, to me, is not a godly reason to collude with sinful behavior. It's sort of like saying, some churches say, well, we're not going to say that the youth pastor sexually molested 2 kids in the church because we heard God's ministry here at the church. I mean, how crazy is that? But they say it all the time. That's what the Catholic Church did, right? We don't want to dishonor, our church by telling the truth about what's going on. And yet, look what happened. It didn't get better. It just got sneakier and uglier and stinkier till it exploded into a gigantic scandal. I don't think that honors God at all. I think God is always about truth and light. Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, rather expose them. And again, how we do it, when we do it, where we do it in the right way is all part of what we learn and conquer. But I would not just shut up and be quiet and just hope for the best. It doesn't sound like that's going to work. All right. Let's see. Leanne says, I've had a destructive marriage, and through the last 3 years, we've begun to restore. Good. It's a process, and it's difficult, but my kids, oh my, do you have resources to help me walk through forgiveness? So, Leanne, are you talking about your forgiveness for your husband, or the kids' forgiveness for their parents for what they've put them through? We've begun to restore. It's a process, and it's difficult, but my kids, oh my, do you have resources to help? I've lost it now. So definitely your kids are going to be traumatized by what you and your husband have gone through, and your kids are traumatized. And they will be blessed if you and your husband can pull it off and actually show them what it looks like to heal that kind of brokenness, to heal the destructive marriage. And so what I would really highly encourage you to do is talk to them, and I don't know if you're talking about your own forgiveness, like how do you forgive your husband for what he did? And forgiveness isn't reconciliation, and it's not trust. What forgiveness is letting go of your right to judge or receive restitution. Okay. So when you forgive someone, not restitution, there's restitution in amends making, but it's not, how do I want to, you let go of your right to receive restitution. Okay. It doesn't mean that they might not give you restitution. Like when Zacchaeus was really restored, when he came to his senses in Luke, when Zacchaeus, the tax collector, who was the richest tax collector, he was the wealthiest man because he extorted all his fellow Jews. Well, I imagine some of the Jews that he extorted had to forgive him because they were so mad at what he did that it was destroying their soul, but they didn't like Zacchaeus and they didn't trust him, right? But when Zacchaeus truly repented, he said, Lord, I'm going to give away half my money, and anyone I've cheated, I'm going to restore 4 times. So Zacchaeus, and making amends, he paid back those he had cheated. But those who had forgiven him for cheating didn't demand or expect that. Now, if he paid him back, I'm sure they took it. So part of forgiveness is giving up your right to have restitution, like someone borrowed $10,000 from you and they didn't pay it back. And forgiving the debt means I'm just going to let it go. I'm not going to ask them for it. Doesn't mean I'm ever going to lend them $10,000 again. I'm not going to trust them. I'm not going to trust their word anymore, but I'm going to let go of it because otherwise it's going to eat me up because they're not going to pay me back. That's what forgiveness is. They're not going to change. They're not going to do anything different. It's letting go of the offense. Many times it's a small offense, so we let it go and it's fine. Other times it's a big offense and we forgive them, but there is no reconciliation. And I liken it back to this unconditional, conditional relationship. When it says God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that he forgives us all, but he doesn't reconcile with us all, because unless we receive that forgiveness and ask for it and tell him we need it, we don't actually get the forgiveness and we don't have the relationship and reconciling with him, right? And so teaching your children what forgiveness is, it's a process. And we decide, I'm going to forgive, I want to let this go. We begin to process the emotions of hurt and anger and whatever it is, our judgment, and start to let that go. We start to have a different picture of this person that we want to, because we choose to forgive, we want to see them in a different light. We want to see them just not as a bad guy, but as a human who has faults just like us, so that the playing field is a little more level. They're a sinner, we're a sinner, and we can forgive them because we would want them to forgive us. But it still might mean that we don't trust them. Okay, so when I had to go through the process of forgiving my mother, I had to own that I had a lot of bitterness and it was crippling me. She could care less. She didn't care if I forgave her. She didn't ask for my forgiveness. She didn't want my forgiveness. She just went on and lived her life. I'm the one who's a mess because I didn't forgive her, right? So I had to decide to forgive her. I let go of my desire for her to ask for my forgiveness, for her to be sorry for what she did. She didn't do any of that. But I still chose to forgive her and let go of the bitterness and the anger and the hurt and any expectation that she would love me like I wanted her to love me, right? Now, later on in her life, when she was dying, she actually did say she was sorry, and we began to build back a relationship, all right, a little bit. But it didn't happen until she began to make some different movements as well, the reconciliation piece. But the forgiveness, I could decide to do that all by myself. So I think we need to teach our children to do that and help them to define what forgiveness is and what isn't. Okay. 6 o'clock. Okay. So I'm going to go a little bit more. And let me just do a few. We still have a good amount of people on the line, so we can do some more. Okay. Helen says, this is awful, but my Christian husband says that Leslie is a dangerous woman and it had relationship counseling success, a rate of 0. How do I respond to this? Well, all I can say is I've helped thousands of women and lots of different people get healthy and whole. I think I am a dangerous woman to some people because I'm saying things differently than what they want to hear. I'm shaking up their little platitudes that let them keep their little kingdom the way they want to keep them. And I'm saying, that's not what God's saying. And that's not what God is meaning when he says these things. And so, yeah, I think I'm a little dangerous and I'm a little controversial because I'm saying to women, you don't have to just be silent lambs led to the slaughter and take it, and this glorifies God. I don't think it does, and I'm not afraid to say it anymore. I used to be a little afraid to say it, but I'm not afraid to say it anymore, so maybe I'm more dangerous than I used to be. But I don't think you need to defend me to your husband, all right? I don't think I don't defend myself to people. People will listen, people won't listen. Jesus didn't defend himself. I'm not Jesus, and he was perfect. And he had people who thought he was dangerous too, right? He is crazy. He is from Satan. That's what people thought. Jesus didn't let it bother him, and I'm not letting it bother me either. So you have to decide whether what I'm saying rings true, what you think the Holy Spirit is saying to you, and love to have you join Conquer, but your husband may not like it because I'm rocking his boat. He wants control of you. He wants to tell you how to think. So he can say to you, I think Leslie's dangerous, but ultimately you're going to have to think for yourself. And that's what I want you to do. And that's what God wants you to do. As a mature, whole person, he's given you a brain. Use it. Think for yourself. Listen for yourself. Test what I say for yourself. Read God's word for yourself. And if I'm in error, please email me and give me some feedback, because I am not Jesus. I'm perfect. And I'm open to saying, hey, I disagree and this is why. And I will take a look at that. And sometimes I may adjust myself. And sometimes I'll say, you know what? We'll have to agree to disagree. All right. Nate wants to know, what do you do when the person refuses to deal with their own sin in individual counseling? How can you reach reconciliation if they won't take ownership? You can't. You can't. And I think this is the hard thing that Christians have a hard time getting. God doesn't reconcile with us if we don't take ownership of our sin, does he? I mean, let's look at it. Your sin separates me. In John, I don't have my Bible here, but if you read it, John 3:16 says what? For God so loved the world, right? He offers forgiveness to everybody, loves everybody. And then John 3:36, the very same chapter, he says something like, if you have the Son, you have life, and you don't have the Son, you're in the utter darkness. There's no relationship. So Nate, there is no reconciliation. Here's another example. Jesus says in Matthew 18, if someone sins against you, go to them and talk to them so that you can be reconciled, right? And if they hear you, what? You've won your brother, you've reconciled. And if they refuse to hear you, bring it to the church. And hopefully the church can advocate for you and help you to help your husband or whoever to see their sin so you can be reconciled. That is God's heart. But then he tells us sometimes that's not going to happen. And if they refuse to listen, that blindness, he says, you can't be reconciled. Treat them as you would a pagan and a tax collector. Every Jew knew what that meant. You didn't have friendships with pagans and tax collectors. There was no reconciliation. The relationship is broken. Doesn't mean you're rude or mean or disrespectful to a pagan or tax collector. They're like a polite stranger. You don't have a relationship. There is no reconciliation without repentance. And people don't like to hear that because they like to just duct tape a marriage together. But the Bible says in Jeremiah, you heal the wounds of my people superficially by promising peace when there is no peace. I don't want to do that. I don't heal the wounds of people superficially by saying, let's just do this. Let's look like there's reconciliation when there is no reconciliation. There is no peace without repentance and healing and restoration. And I'm all for that. If somebody wants to do that, I will work harder than anybody to help them move through the trenches there. But if they don't want that, I'm not going to pretend. I'm not going to pretend that it's like a patient going for cancer. This is what you're asking me, Nate. The patient's going for cancer. They've got cancer, and they say to the doctor, well, how do I get rid of my cancer without having to take chemo? How do I get rid of my cancer if I don't want to take the treatment? You can't. You can't. And I'm not going to lie to them saying, well, take 2 aspirin and you'll be okay. I'm not going to do that. So that's why I'm dangerous. All right. So someone says, I want to stay with my spouse. Can Conquer help me with this? So I have 2 ways of helping women. First, my goal is to stay well. So if you can stay well and you can be a woman like Abigail who stayed well, she's described as a woman of strength and wisdom, beautiful and intelligent woman. She was married to a jerk, Nabal, remember him? And she didn't submit to Nabal's stupidity when he said, I'm not going to feed David's men, and David got outraged and he was ready to kill everybody. She said, I'm not submitting to that stupid decision. I am going to make food, bring it to David, and beg his forgiveness for my stupid husband's decision and see if he will pardon Nabal. She advocated for her husband, but she didn't cover for him. You see, she did what was in his best interest to help Nate, saved his life and her household's life, as David was acting like a fool too. But she also didn't just say, well, I guess I just have to trust God and submit to my husband. And I don't know, I don't really have any say or any voice. She said, no way. I'm taking action here. And she went in a humble way to David and said, David, you're the Lord's anointed. You don't really want to do this, do you? This is going to ruin your whole ministry. And thank God David said, thank you, Abigail, you brought me to my senses. Right? And he didn't kill everybody, and God took care of Nabal. And we see that it turned out well for Abigail and David, and Nabal not so well. But so yes, I encourage women, if they can, to stay well, and what that looks like, and what tools do they need to be able to stay well. And sometimes you just can't stay well. Your safety and your sanity are so fragile that you just can't. And so how do I leave well? Because a lot of women leave and they don't leave well. They leave angry, bitter, despondent, unhealthy, and they end up marrying somebody else who's just as destructive in a different way. And so they haven't left well either. So if we're to be God-centered women, then we have to allow whatever situation we're in to teach us its lessons. And some of it is to learn how to be healthier, how to be a more God-centered woman. And then the decision of staying or leaving is clearer for us. We don't want to make that decision solely out of pain. We may have to if there's safety and sanity issues, but then we don't divorce until we reflect about what we're going to do. All right. Can you do conquer from another country? Absolutely. You could do conquer from anywhere in the world. And we do have women in conquer from Poland and from France and other countries. So yes, you can do conquer, but we do speak English on the phone. So if you don't speak English and you don't read English, then conquer probably wouldn't be helpful for you. When is enough enough? I feel stuck in a pattern of maintaining boundaries and him asking for forgiveness and another chance. When do you know that he won't change? He says he asks God to forgive us. He says God asks us to forgive endlessly. You can forgive endlessly, 70 times 7, but you may not trust or forgive. You may not trust or reconcile, right? I've already talked about the reconciliation and the trust and forgiveness are separate. So yes, you may have to forgive again and again and again and again and again, but that may not mean that you let someone access to you to continue to do the same things over again. That's kind of foolish. So let's say that someone borrowed your car and they crashed it and you forgave them, and they borrowed it again and they crashed it and you forgave them, and they borrowed it again and you crashed it and forgave them. And you said, hey, you need driving lessons. You're a terrible driver. Please get some driving lessons because I'm not going to let you borrow my car again until you take driving lessons. And they refuse to take driving lessons. Don't you think it'd be kind of stupid to keep letting them borrow your car? You might forgive them, and you might have to forgive them as many times as you let them borrow your car. But why would you put yourself in the position of continuing to let them borrow your car if they've refused to take driving lessons so that they could drive it better, and that you're the one who's supposed to absorb all the consequences of that and just forgive them? I don't think that makes sense biblically. I don't think it makes sense in human terms. If you could get me my Bible, let me just read you a verse. I'll get my Bible on my phone. Hold on. I think this is really, really important. So I'm going to just take the time to read this to you. There's lots of verses on consequences, but let me just read to you one of them. If I can pull my Bible up here on YouVersion. All right. So read Proverbs chapter 1. So let's go to Proverbs chapter 1. And we'll go down to the end of the verse. Okay, so it says, all right, I'll just start reading around verse 22. How long, you simpletons, will you insist on being simple-minded? How long will you mockers relish in your mocking? So he's talking about destructive people here. How long will you fools hate knowledge? Come and listen to my counsel. I share my heart with you and make you wise. I called to you so often, but you wouldn't come. I reached out to you, but you paid no attention. You ignored my advice and rejected the correction I offered you. So I will laugh when you're in trouble. I will mock you when disaster overtakes you. When calamity overtakes you like a storm, when disaster engulfs you like a cyclone, and anguish and distress overwhelm you. When they cry out for help, I will not answer. Though they anxiously search for me, they will not find me, for they hated knowledge and chose not to fear the Lord. They rejected my advice and paid no attention when I corrected them. And here's this. Therefore, they must eat the bitter fruit of living their own way, choking on their own schemes. For simpletons turn away from me to death. Fools are destroyed by their own complacency. But all who listen to me will live in peace, untroubled by fear of harm. So Proverbs is saying when you continuously ignore wisdom and you live stupidly and you reject the counsel of God, you have a terrible price to pay, and it's negative consequences. And those consequences don't go away just because you say, ouch, ooh, I don't like them. You built them. You created them. You didn't listen. And so why is it that we tell Christian women and men that it's ungodly to make their spouse suffer consequences when God says, this is what you sowed, what you're reaping, what you sowed. If you sow weeds in your marriage, don't expect a crop of roses. Don't expect a crop of roses. And yet we're somehow deceiving ourselves into thinking that God says something different than what he says. He says the same thing in the New Testament. That how you live shows itself in your fruit. When people of John the Baptist's days, for example, the Pharisees were trying to act all religious, he said, you know what? Prove by the way that you live that you've repented of your sin and turned to God. I want to see some real fruit. I want to see the evidence. These are hard words because we'd rather just pretend everything's well, but it's not. So that was a long answer to your question, but all right. Let's see. How does a Christian woman handle church shunning? There's been many women who have been shunned by their church, and that just makes me so mad. Really mad. And thankfully, a lot of churches are waking up to some of the ways that they've viewed things, but not all. So I would highly recommend that you find another church that doesn't do that. That a church understands that, you left for safety reasons or sanity reasons, or you had biblical grounds. And even if you didn't, if we all do stupid things, if you left for bad reasons, that you have a church that will love and support you into repentance and help you and not just shun you. So I think that there's a control mechanism. I think there's a place for distancing yourself for people who aren't repentant, and the church does that just like we would do. So why can the church do it? So let me give you a story. So I was working with a woman whose church is now going to discipline her for filing for divorce from her adulterous spouse that's not supported her, that's mentally cruel to her, that's never worked and supported the family and committed adultery. So she's under church discipline for divorcing, but he's a member of the church too. He's never been disciplined. He currently doesn't even go to the church, but he's not been disciplined. Why not? Why is there this double standard that when a woman says enough is enough already, I'm not going to do this anymore, and files for divorce, all of a sudden she's up for church discipline, but a man who's been living like the world for years and still is a member of that church and has been unfaithful and has not been a provider and has not treated his family well, and yet he's not been disciplined. I don't get that. That's a really double standard that happens a lot. So, and as soon as he says, I'm sorry and I want my wife back, she's supposed to forgive him and everything's supposed to be better. I don't think the Bible teaches that. I think the Bible says wait and see if he produces the fruit that leads to repentance, but not immediately reconcile. But find another church. All right, let's see. My mother is an emotionally destructive person. After our pastors became involved, she has cut off all communication and said I may not step foot on her property. How do I show openness for reconciliation without enabling her manipulative silent treatment? Michelle, I just think that, again, she's cut off all communication because she didn't want to be accountable. She didn't want to be responsible. She didn't want to have to own her stuff. And so it was easier for her to run away and hide. And so I would just, send her a Mother's Day card, and if she sends it back, I might just let it go. And I would just pray for her and do your work. So in my relationship with my mother, she, I didn't see her and speak to her for 15 years, and it was sort of mutual, but it was more initiated by her. She was just very indifferent. And it's hard to have a relationship with someone who just is indifferent. They don't care about you. And so, I just had to let it go. But what I did was I did my work. I worked on forgiveness. I worked on my attitude. I worked on getting stronger so that if I had to be in a position where I had to help her because I wanted to honor her as my mother, I didn't want to do it out of resentment and anger and, kind of retaliating, doing stuff to her that was harsh or cold because I just had to do it. I wanted to do it with the right spirit. And when she got ill, that's what I did. I did administer to her and help her when she was dying of lung cancer. But it turned out because I had done my work, she was able to receive grace in a way that she never had before. And so it turned out to be a beautiful thing. So I would not worry so much about reconciliation, but just do your work, remain open, praying and saying, God, if the opportunity becomes available for you to show some kindness to your mother for something or some ministry to her, then if you can have the opportunity to do it, do it. That's part of core strength. I will be empathetic and compassionate without enabling, as long as you have good boundaries. And that's going to be important in the future so that she knows that the same cycle is not going to repeat itself. Okay? All right. Linda doesn't know how to deal with the continued smear campaign after the divorce. That is a very common thing for you to be smeared, for you to be discredited, so that what happens now is the victim turns into the villain. And it's not uncommon for that to happen. A lot of women go through that. And I think the best way that you can deal with the smear campaign is through Jesus's teaching when he says, when they reviled him, he did not revile in return, but he kept trusting himself to his faithful creator who judges righteously. I think that's in 1st or 2nd Peter 4. So I think that it's really important that you just listen to God's words, not human words. I think that's what kept Jesus on the straight and narrow. You know, there are lots of people telling him who you are. Oh, you're the king of the Jews. You need to be, you know, even when Peter was saying, oh, you need to do this. And he said, you know, get behind me, Satan. You're not speaking God's words. You're speaking man's words to me. Or when the Pharisees were saying, oh, he's demon possessed, he's saying, you know what? How can Satan fight against himself? So he, you know, spoke the truth. He didn't just always stay silent like he did at the crucifixion piece of it, but he didn't pay back evil for evil. This is so crucial if you're going to be a woman of strength and dignity and develop core strength, is that you're not allowing yourself to be overcome by evil. And because when they do, the smear campaign is evil against you, right? And so it's like shooting little poison darts into your spirit. And it's so easy to say, you know what, if he wants to give it out, I can give it out just as good as he can. I can start a smear campaign of my own. I mean, that's our human nature, to want to retaliate and pay back. And Jesus says, we don't do that. That's not what we do. And so in Law to Conquer, we work to support women to not do that, to not pay back for evil for evil. But what do you do then? How do you overcome evil with good? Well, you speak the truth in love. You expose the unfruitful deeds of darkness. You don't revile in return, but there are some other things that you can do that are good, right? It is good. Even Jesus says, or Peter says, if you suffer for doing good, and you'll get a video on that following this webinar in a couple of days. If you suffer for doing good, what is that good is really important, because it's not just to enable. I mean, it's not good to let someone harm you. It's not good to let a rapist rape you, is it? No. If you can help it, sometimes you're an unwilling victim, but for you to just say, oh, I'm going to lay down my life for this rapist because this is what Jesus would want me to do. Doesn't that sound a little crazy? But that's what we sort of do with marriages, and it's not godly. All right. How do you deal with a husband who had tested low thyroid crazy making? How do you deal with a husband that had tested low thyroid crazy making? He refused to get medical help. Could all this NPD be a result of changing hormones, thyroid, or maybe other issues? Certainly, if someone's personality is changing and they're not the man they used to be, that's not an NPD. That's not a personality disorder. Personality disorders don't come on suddenly in middle life. Personality disorders are called personality disorders because they're pervasive personality disorders, and people noticed them when they were a child and they just didn't change. So we see like children who are really selfish and angry and all that, and we're hoping like, oh my gosh, when you mature, I hope you're not like this. And most people aren't. When they mature, they kind of realize that's inappropriate. I shouldn't act that way. They have more maturity to them. But personality disorder people don't. They are the same personality. So if you have a sudden change in behavior from a husband who was a good guy, or a wife who was a good woman, and all of a sudden she's, you know, not handling herself well, then yes, I would definitely suspect a medical issue, or a secret sin that has developed. So when people become very angry and volatile, and they never were that way before, it could be a medical issue, brain tumor even, or it could be that they're heavy into an affair and pornography and they're ashamed and that's how they're acting out. So I would certainly encourage you to seek medical help if someone's personality change. I remember working with someone who husband stabbed her, and I was asked to do an evaluation. He was in jail for stabbing her. And she was a sweet older lady, and she said, you know, my husband's a wonderful man. And everybody's like, she's in denial, he's an abuser. But he really was. He was a wonderful man, but had been given the wrong medication, and it put him in a psychotic episode and got very paranoid and stabbed her. And so, yes, medical things can cause us to be crazy. But I would say that if he refused to get treatment for his condition, or refused to change medications, or refused to get medication, he was stabbing her, she's still unsafe. Okay, it might not be a personality disorder, but it might be a medical condition. But even a medical condition, when you act out, like there's certain medical conditions, like, certain frontal lobe damage or certain, brain abnormalities, brain tumors that may cause you to get very aggressive, or mental illnesses, paranoid schizophrenia that can cause you to be very scary. And you can have a lot of compassion for someone who has a mental disorder that way. It's still, your safety is important to God, and not at the expense of your safety do you stay in a relationship that is scary enough that you might lose your life. All right. Let's see. Our 32-year marriage fell apart 11 years ago. Is there a way to stay in a healthy manner even though the relationship is destructive? Kathy, without knowing more details, so here's what I would say is, so for 22 years you weren't destructive, it wasn't unhealthy, or 20 years, and now 11 years got destructive. What happened? What happened to change things? And is there the possibility of making some repairs? And, have you tried those, and what were they? And if he doesn't want to make repairs and he doesn't want to work on things, I would have to define the level of destructiveness. So for example, when there is this, I feel like an object, or I feel like dismissed. All right, we talked about I feel dismissed, or I feel objectified. Some women have, learned to build their own life, and they live parallel lives. Their spouse does what he wants and you do what you want, and there's really no intimacy, there's no connection, there's no companionship, there's no real partnership, but there's no real biting and devouring each other either. There's no physical, emotional, or economic safety issues. There's just, can you learn to live well in that? Many women do. Many women do, for lots of reasons. They want to stay. There's medical insurance, there's financial stability, there's grandchildren, there's family issues, there's lots of family ties. And I think God creates family for lots of those reasons. And that's a good thing. And I'm not saying we should break up families for those kind of things. I just want to help women understand that they have biblical options, especially when there's safety, sanity issues involved. All right. I'm going to do just a few more questions. Do we still have a pretty good audience who is waiting for questions, huh? Wow, we have a lot of people still online. My belly's getting hungry. Huh? Okay, let's see. My husband isn't abusive, but he is lazy and selfish. He's unemotional and difficult to be in a relationship with. I have been guilty of overfunctioning in the past and covering for his lazy behavior. I'm no longer doing this. How do I balance love and his sinfulness? Really good question. The Bible says laziness is a very serious sin, and we don't really talk about certain sins in the Bible. We don't talk about laziness. We don't talk about gluttony, but there really are very destructive sins. And so I think that it's very important that we not just overfunction to accommodate someone's laziness. So you might have to have some tough consequences or tough conversation with your husband. For example, and I don't know what particular kind of lazy, let's say he's lazy and taking care of things around the house, right? So it might be that, it's not okay with me. So you're going to speak for yourself. It's not okay with me that you're expecting me to carry the load of mowing the lawn and cleaning the house and taking care of the kids while you play sports and softball and watch video games and movies all weekend. What can we do to rebalance that? All right, so you're not accusing him, you're not attacking him. You're saying, I have a problem with the way things are right now. Are you open to talking about this change? Right? And he may or he may not be, but then what you can say, and again, depending on your resources or what consequences you can implement, say, well, I'm not going to be mowing the grass anymore. So that's your job. Or you can pick a job that you want if you want to pick one, but I can't do it all anymore. I'm getting exhausted. Right? And then the grass starts growing. Maybe shame by the neighbors will motivate him to cut the grass. Or maybe you say, well, I'm going to take money out of the account and pay someone to do it. So that now he can't have it every way he wants. So he can't keep all his money and not do any work and leave the house in shambles unless you have no power. And this is something I would say to younger women. Marriage is a partnership. And when you get yourself in a marriage where you have no say about anything, no say about finances, no say about division of labor, no say about what happens, and you're just expected to live however he wants to live, even though it's extremely painful to you. That's really that lack of reciprocity that we talked about, or the lack of mutuality. And a marriage usually doesn't start out that way. It usually grows that way, and it grows that way because as a woman, you've continued to overfunction and he's continued to underfunction, and that gap has gotten bigger and bigger. And it often starts this way. And I'm not saying all the time, but often starts where, you've got this marriage that starts, and a woman wants to be a good Christian wife, and we want to make our husbands happy. And so we want to do everything. We want to make them happy. We want to make breakfast for them, and we want to make their lunch, and we want to keep the house all clean, and we don't want to be a nag. And so we don't ask, we don't speak up. And so it starts off this way maybe, and then as we start over functioning and they think we're fine with that, they start under functioning, and pretty soon, 10 years into the marriage, there's this huge gap, and we're resentful and angry, and they're like, what's wrong with you? I'm fine, never complained before. And so so we have to take some ownership, especially if you're a mom of daughters or you're a newly married person, before the destructive elements get so much in place. Even if a husband is physically abusive, I have to tell you the number of women who have said to me the first time their husband got physical, if you ever do that again, I will call the police and you'll be in jail. And not many times does it happen again because they know you mean it, because consequences do make someone think, do I want to pay that price? An abusive husband who's physically abusive with his wife at home is very rarely physically abusive with anybody else. Why not? Because he knows he'd end up in jail. So it's not a matter of self-control. It's a matter of controlling you, and he can do it through physical intimidation. And when you aren't willing to let yourself be treated that way anymore, and you put down strong consequences, that has the best chance of waking your husband up to changing. Now, he may just turn into more covert ways, which is a whole different subject, but at least you're safer than if he's physically bullying and intimidating you. All right. Is there anything you have for the families of abuse victims, specifically for parents and siblings of abuse victims? That's a great question, and it's a great idea. No, I don't particularly, other than personal coaching. I coach with a lot of families of abuse victims. So I just worked with a family whose daughter married an abuser, and they were coping with how to deal with her, and the way she's cut them off, and their fear of what's happening to her and the grandchildren, all those kind of things. So I do a lot of one-on-one coaching, but I don't have any group stuff. But that's a really good idea for somebody to develop a support group for families of victims of abuse, whether they be their children or their parents or whoever, because it is tough to watch. It's tough to be a witness of someone deteriorating before your eyes because they're too afraid to speak up for themselves or set boundaries or consequences. All right. Robin wants to know, is it okay to break off all physical contact if it makes me feel uncomfortable? He hasn't been willing to work on the emotional side of our marriage. Kissing him feels like kissing a friend, and intimacy makes me feel used. This is where I'm dangerous. I think this is a really important question, and I'm going to sound like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth. So let me first say the one side, and I'll say the other side, okay? In a marriage, there are only two ways to connect. I shouldn't say that. There's only two ways to build closeness. And one is talk, and the other is touch. And there's two ways of doing a lot of damage in a relationship. And one is talk, and the other is touch. So you can talk bad to someone. You can be verbally abusive, like we looked at in the webinar. And you can be physically abusive, and that can harm a relationship. Or you can be verbally complimentary and verbally intimate and verbally vulnerable, and you can be physically intimate and physically vulnerable and physically warm and affectionate. Okay, so those two channels are the primary channels for building connection and intimacy. And we don't build intimacy with everybody. We don't have intercourse with everybody. We don't take our clothes off in front of everybody. And we don't talk vulnerably with everybody, but hopefully we have that in a marriage. When those channels are not working, when we're talking bad and there's physical abuse, or there's no positive touch and there's no positive talk, a marriage is going to die. Marriage is going to die. Okay. So this is where it gets dicey, because when there's a lot of bad touch and a lot of bad talk, there usually is no desire for good touch, because I already feel bad enough about the bad touch and the bad talk. I don't feel like being close to you. I don't want to be close to you. However, when we do it as a punishment, like I don't like you right now, I'm mad at you, I'm not going to talk to you, right? There's a difference between saying, I can't talk to you right now because you're yelling at me and I can't have a conversation with you when you're doing that. Or I can't talk to you right now because I'm too exhausted to talk to you in a godly way and I'm going to say some things I regret. So I need to take a time out. There's a difference between saying, I can't talk to you or I won't talk to you because you make me mad and I don't like you, right? When we cut that channel off, we're almost putting a death stamp on the marriage. In the same way, when we do that physically, when we say, I won't be affectionate with you, I won't show you love because you make me mad or you upset me or disappoint me, it's a dicey thing because if we want a marriage, we're hurting the very thing that connects us. However, there's times, and I want to affirm what you said, there's times you can't. Just like there's times you can't talk to someone because they're so verbally abusive or they won't hear you or they're, overbearing and they won't listen to you. There's just no point in talking because there's no connection in the talking. In the same way, there's times when physical connection is broken because there's such a disrespect of your personhood that intimacy is not possible to do in a genuine kind of way. And so here's where it gets really hard because so if you talk to your husband and you say, I would love to improve our sex life, I would love to improve our intimacy, but this is what happens. Just like I would love to improve our conversations, but when you scream and yell at me and curse at me, I find it really hard to have a conversation with you, right? So I would love to improve our intimacy, but when you don't talk to me for 4 days or you never say anything nice unless you want sex from me, or you're rough with me and you don't care about how I feel, and then you want to be all tender in the bedroom, that doesn't make me feel like I can do that. That's saying, let's repair our relationship. It's not, I'm saying I'm punishing you. It's saying, I'm all about repairing this if we can, but I'm not going to fake it. And I think there's legitimacy there of saying, I can't do this way. I can't just be a body. I can't just be a machine that does something because I'm supposed to. When I do it, it blows up in my face. When I try to have a conversation with you and you throw hot water in my face, I can't do that. And when I try to tell you about this doesn't feel good to me and our intimacy is hurting me and you don't care about that. I remember talking to a woman recently who said, and this is a very small thing, but she was feeling that. And she said to her husband, you have terrible breath. Can you just put some mouthwash on your, breath? You ate onions or something tonight and it's just bothering me. He didn't even want to do that. And so she puts a pillow over her face. And he was fine with that. He was fine as long as she had the bottom half of her body available to him. He didn't care if her pillow was over her face. To me, that says something about the marriage, something really sad. And is she just a body to use? Is that what their marriage is? I don't think a man would want to feel like just a paycheck either, right? I don't think that that's what he would want to feel like. So you don't care anything about him and all you want is his paycheck. That would be horrible for him. So I want to be careful about what I'm saying. Nobody wants to feel like they're being used just for what you can give them. You want to have a relationship and a connection of some sort, but the only two channels are talk and touch. So when those are broken, there's not a lot of hope to put this marriage back together unless you're working to repair those two channels, right? And understanding what broke them. All right. Jill wants to know, please address the feeling of guilt a woman has for reacting to her husband's abuse and doubting if it's her or him that's the real problem. Okay. So here's the problem, that we do react to people, right? I mean, let's just put it out of the marriage for a minute. Okay. So when a clerk is rude to you at the grocery store, it's hard not to be rude back, right? Or if your children are doing cartwheels in the living room and they just knocked over your favorite lamp and you've told them a million times not to do cartwheels in the living room, it's hard not to react, right? So we do react to people in poor ways at times. But here's the difference. So when we react to someone, do we take ownership for our inability to handle ourselves well in that provocative situation? Or do we blame the other person for our reaction? You made me react that way. See, that's not true. That's not true. They didn't make me react that way. I reacted that way because I didn't have enough maturity, enough impulse control, enough strength to stop myself from reacting in a poor way, right? So I have to own that. And that's the part that becomes destructive. So that's why we teach core strength. I'm responsible for me, because it would be insanity for a woman to say, well, you're responsible for you, when he says, well, you pushed my buttons, that's why I called you, you know what? It'd be insanity for a woman to say, well, you're responsible for that, but I'm not responsible for my reaction to you. Of course I am. Of course I am. Even if I react poorly or sinfully or destructively, it's understandable, but I'm still responsible. I'm responsible for me. Jesus says, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so when I react and vile stuff comes pouring out of my mouth, it's coming from my heart. And I got to own that. Just as you would want your husband to own that. If you were an imperfect wife and you did something he didn't like and he became abusive, that's his responsibility. Or if you were an indifferent wife, or if you didn't want to have sex tonight, and he said, well, then that means I have to go watch pornography because you won't do this for me. That's his choice. He doesn't have to do that. He's reacting out of his pain and doing something sinful, right? So we live with imperfect people. We are going to push each other's buttons. We are going to disappoint each other. We aren't always going to do what each other wants. And how we react to that is totally our responsibility. So part of core strength and part of what I teach and conquer is, yes, you need to take responsibility for you. And if you're reacting poorly, own it. Now, you may not own it in the minute. It may not even be safe for you to own it. But you've got to own it inside here to say, boy, I am so reactive right now. I can't even be in this conversation. That's why I need to set a boundary. And when we set a boundary, and I teach this in Conquer, we don't set a boundary on our spouse. You can't talk to me that way. We set a boundary on ourselves. I can't be in this conversation because I'm going to react. I'm going to explode and say some awful things that I don't want to say. I'm aware of myself. I'm going to take responsibility for myself. I'm getting myself out into a timeout so I don't react this way. Or when my kids are doing something destructive, I'm not saying, you're making me crazy. What I'm saying is, I'm about to explode on my kids. I don't want to do that. And I got to go take a time out to calm myself down and handle this in a godly way. That is spiritual maturity. That is emotional maturity. That is learning to be healthier. And that's part of what we work on in Conquer. So I hope that answered your question. By joining Conquer, is it possible for you to help me get out of this destructive marriage? No, I don't get anybody out of a destructive marriage. That's your decision and your responsibility to stay or to leave, whichever you feel God calls you to do. So we will talk about the options. You will hear from other women who've made one decision or another. You will look at the pros and cons. You will learn how to make a good decision, but ultimately it is your decision. I think part of thinking like an owner is taking that responsibility for your life and learning to make good decisions and learning to handle what you need to handle in that decision, because somebody else can't make your decision for, or then what you are controlled, and you're not a child, you're an adult, and you need to take that responsibility for your future and your life and make those decisions for yourself. So can I help you get equipped to make a better decision? Yes. Can I help you think through that decision? Yes. But ultimately that decision is yours, as are the consequences of staying or leaving. Those are your decisions. Okay. So it is late and I'm getting hungry and I'm sort of getting brain dead at this point. Has this been helpful? And if it has, and you'd like me to do more of these kind of webinars, teaching, I know we've done some Facebook Lives and that's been fun. This is a little calmer than Facebook Live because I'm not trying to stare into a little cell phone and worrying about all my technological buttons or my phone discharging and all that. But if this has been helpful and you'd like me to do more of that, please fill in a chat about some of the aha moments you had, or like if we had a chance to sit down and chat, some of the things that you'd like to know more about. I want to invite you again to join Conquer tonight, because you get a part of that special phone call that only people who join tomorrow won't be a part of the phone call. You can be a part of Conquer, but you won't be a part of the phone call. So if you're still on that fence and you'd like to be a part of this special phone call, it'll be 90 minutes of just that small group of people who join tonight. And we're also going to do a webinar on Friday. So those two people who join during that time will be a part of this phone call. And you'll just get an opportunity to ask all your questions with me on the phone. It's going to be on a conference line, so nobody can trace where it's from, or nobody knows you're on it at all. And so you don't have to worry about that. And you will be able to then know how to get into Conquer, understand how the process works where we talk on the phone, and then you'll be able to ask me questions like you're just asking me now. We'll just do it over the phone instead of a video feed. All righty? May I pray for you before we go? Okay. Dear Lord, I thank you so much for each person who's been here and their hearts and their pain. Lord, you know their story. I don't know their story. I don't know most of the people who are here. I just see little snippets of their name and I feel for them. There's so much pain going on in the world and in Christian homes, and we don't address it very well, and we don't support people in these situations very well. And so I just pray that you would comfort them tonight, that you would give them wisdom as to whether Conquer is a good fit for them and whether this is a good decision for them. I pray that you would just bless them, lead them to the right people who will help them, the right groups, if it's not Conquer, a church group, a Bible study, other support place somewhere else. Father, I just pray for Conquer, that you would continue to grow it, keep it as sweet and as supportive as it's been over the last 2 years. It's beyond what I could ever thought that it would be, and I know it's blessed many, many women. And so I just pray that you would continue to keep it strong and God-centered, and women who want to grow to become their best selves, and not just women who are angry that they're in a destructive marriage. There's that, but help them to get past that into something more, Lord, for them. Thank you for each person who's taken their time out tonight to be in this webinar, and I just pray that you would bless them in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, I'm going to go. Good night, ladies and gentlemen who are here. Bye-bye.